Mizurna Falls introduces players to a strange and thought-provoking adventure that wears its inspiration on its sleeves, the main one being the cult classic Twin Peaks. After the opening credits roll, you're introduced to the main character Matthew, who wakes to find his classmate Emma missing. This sparks your journey through the dark and mysterious town as you unravel the puzzle and ultimately answer the question, what happened to Emma? On the gameplay front, you're given 7 days in order to accomplish this goal, which usually consists of talking to the townspeople for information and searching the surprisingly vast landscape for clues. Now, the time limit may put some players off, as it does make it extremely difficult to see everything the game has to offer. First off, there are unique events which take place at specific times, as well as 3 separate endings. To be fair, this does add to the overall replay value and will give you a reason to play through it multiple times, so to me it's not that much of an issue. One issue though are the inclusion of tank controls. I for one have never minded them and didn't find them affecting my enjoyment of the game, but I know there's people out there where it will. Either way, Mizurna Falls still offers up an intriguing adventure that is set in what is quite possibly one of the most impressive locations in a game of this age. There's a full day and night as well as weather cycle that brings it to life. Each NPC has their own individual daily routine, which helps ground it in reality even further. It's a truly open experience. If you fancy playing something completely different, or something that will keep you guessing every second, I cannot recommend this game enough. And with a full translation now available, there's never been a better time to give it a go. The PlayStation was a great place for fighting games. With the likes of Street Fighter Alpha 3 and Tekken to name a couple, players were never short of options when it came to choosing their next game to play. One fighter that sadly never made it west though was Bakumatsu Roman, or more widely known as The Last Blade. Coming from SNK and originally starting out life in the arcades, The Last Blade shares much in common with the likes of Samurai Shodown, but takes on a simpler approach to its weapon-based gameplay. Each of the characters all share a string of basic attacks as well as individual special moves that help them stand out from one another, but the main mechanic you'll be taking advantage of are the different styles of combat you can use. Firstly, you've got the speed mode, which allows the player to chain together normal moves into specials as well as a unique combo. Power mode, on the other hand, naturally increases the amount of damage you deal out, and allows you to execute super desperation moves which inflict a devastating amount of harm to the enemy. And there's plenty of modes to try out as well. Among the usual practice, survival, story and versus, there's a pretty extensive option that doesn't involve actually playing the game. Here you can see the characters' biographies, combo videos, story and artwork. Overall, the somber setting and fairly intriguing characters give Bakumatsu a very distinct feel. While it does seem similar to Samurai Shodown at a first glance, it's almost nothing like SNK's first weapon fighting series. If you're looking for a solid fighting game on the PlayStation 1, Bakumatsu Roman will not disappoint. The first thing many players will notice about Tearing Saga is the uncanny resemblance to the Fire Emblem series. From its story and gameplay elements to minor sound effects, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this was a forgotten entry in that franchise. However, this by no means makes the game bad. In fact, the elements it does take from Fire Emblem, along with the various ways it plays and toys around with them, makes Tearing Saga an incredibly enjoyable RPG. The plot itself is all about a prince known as Runan and his confusing political romp through the continent of Liberia. While it presents decent themes and develops them well, the story itself involves a heavy amount to take in, especially the political ties from country to country. True, these elements come together in a satisfying conclusion, but the thick narrative may be too much investment for many players to see it through. Gameplay, on the other hand, is what truly helps Tearing Saga succeed, especially when it comes to the robust class system which mixes and matches concepts in strange ways. Priestesses can take off their clothes and dance for their allies. Armored tanks can become stationary catapults on a whim. Much of the time, these are some of the best motivations for getting through the game, simply to see what strange combinations the game can cobble together. Unfortunately, this strangeness also manifests itself in less positive ways, with the clunky mechanics being the most obvious. But the most glaring omission is actually making plans before battle. While it is possible to decide where your units start, doing so requires as actually starting the battle. This means that an effective plan involves arranging characters via menus and loading a previous save should they not be deployed to your liking. Although it never quite reaches the highs of the series that clearly inspired it, Tearing Saga is still a great game that is bound to keep turn-based strategy fans busy right until the end. If you're at all familiar with Donkey Kong 64, you may have fond memories of a certain minecart level. Imagine that but blown up into a full game, and what you get is Mad Panic Coaster. It sees you controlling two high school students as you cling on for dear life and try to survive some hellish roller coasters. There is actually a story, with each of the tracks being designed by a crazy scientist hell-bent on creating the greatest roller coaster of all time. And since they were designed by a madman, any sense of safety is thrown straight out the window. It's up to you to steer the roller coaster car using the D-pad to make sure it stays on the track. To make matters worse, the roller coasters have various monsters, traps and jumps to avoid as well. In addition to jumping over gaps, hitting square will make the girl throw some sort of yellow ball projectile that explodes at a long range, while hitting circle will make the boy throw that same sort of projectile but at a shorter range. Falling off the track or getting hit by something will cost you health, and once you run out, you must start the level all over again. For every 3 roller coasters you do complete, a boss will be waiting for you. All of them are similar to the regular enemies, except that they take many more hits to kill. The levels themselves take you through an abundance of locations, ranging from scary castles to the ocean to Wonderland to inner cities. Visually, most of the game is constructed out of polygons, but the boy and girl are sprites, allowing them to appear more expressive than PlayStation 1 era characters would typically allow. Mad Panic Coaster goes incredibly fast, but sometimes too fast for its own good. You barely have any time to react to half of what's going on, and just mashing the attack buttons can sometimes be the best strategy. Despite its flaws, Mad Panic Coaster is still an enjoyable game that is well worth trying out for yourself. Twin B is one of those series that earned monumental success overseas, but just never caught on in the West. For those who are not in the know, the Twin B series follows the adventures of 2 kids named Light and Pastel. They are the brave pilots of Twin B and Winby, 2 ultra-cute robot ships with minds of their own. Under the guidance of the scientist who created the 2 robots, these kids board them, taken to the skies to battle the forces of evil. Now the deluxe pack version actually includes 2 separate games. You get the first one released in the arcades, as well as its sequel, which in my eyes is the superior version. For a start, it actually has some sort of story to follow. Sure, it's nothing mind-blowing, but it does give the game the sort of momentum that was lacking in the first. You, or you and a friend in 2-player mode, take control of Twin B, Winby or Gwynby through 6 widely imaginative vertically scrolling levels. And what a bizarrely wonderful world they dreamed up. Taking inspiration from Alice in Wonderland, you find yourself battling a seemingly endless barrage of marching card soldiers, giant multicolored cats who patrol certain areas, and even Tweedledum and Dee who act as bosses as one of the levels. You fly overhead a large variety of areas around Melody's kingdom, including a giant winding and twisting tower and even a large bridge that overlooks various bizarre backdrops like clocks and desserts that float by in the background. You can tell the programmers got to let their imaginations run wild, especially with some of the boss battles, like the giant doll who shoots lasers out of her eyes at you. It's worth playing once, especially for the imaginative adventure, but it's just all too short. If you really want a good introduction to the Twin B series, I recommend you look into Poppin' Twin B and Rainbow Bell Adventure, 2 incredible titles that were released for the Super Nintendo. They have much more gameplay than the 2 titles on this disc. That's not saying what you do get in the deluxe pack is not worth it, as if you're a fan of shooters, there will be plenty on offer here for you to enjoy. Just don't expect for it to last that long. LSD is by far one of the most strangest games to ever appear on the PlayStation 1. It's the brainchild of Japanese artist Osamu Sato, who long rejected the idea of video games. He instead wanted to use the hardware as a means to create art, and for this reason alone, LSD instantly stands out amongst the hundreds of games that released on the console. Now, the entire adventure is based on the dream diaries of one of the employees at ASMIC, and as a result, LSD stays true to its name and presents a bizarre labyrinth of locations locations without much rhyme or reason. The gameplay is pretty bare bones with no real missions, so it's up to you to make it fun. You're controlling some kind of character who's dreaming extremely weird stuff that you'd only expect to see on an acid trip. You're supposed to go around big landscapes and search for teleportation spots, which lead you to different spaces. In one area, you may be finding yourself in a nice forest with no dangers at all, just the nature to admire. Look at the river, see the stars, listen to the relaxing background music. In fact, most of the areas in this game are, well, family friendly, even if weird, except for one, and that's a dark downtown district. This is the point of no return, where a few horror elements start to creep in. You'll see heads roll, you'll see people executed, you'll see dead people lying on the ground, and yes, you can even get killed in this city too if you're not careful enough. When you least expect it and make a turn, a creature may be running towards you in a dark room, just to scare you off. It can get pretty dark at points. So how long will this game last? Well, it's almost infinite. No one is known for completing it, and no one probably will. This may be because the number of dreams are endless. It's not confirmed, but that's what it looks like. The game is constantly changing and giving something new to the player, which is the main reason to keep playing, especially if you're invested enough to do so. As with most weird games, it won't be for everyone, but if you're on the lookout for something completely off the wall and with a few scares thrown in, LSD is a solid choice. Tales of Fantasia is a port of the original Super Nintendo RPG, which itself was the first in the franchise. Unfortunately, the PlayStation 1 version was never officially localized, and for many years all that the Western audience could play was a butchered Game Boy Advance port. It sees you taking up the fighter's class and a band of like-minded heroes as you set out on a journey to avenge all those that perished when your village was destroyed. It's pretty standard RPG fare, but where Fantasia comes into its own is within battle. With it all being presented in real time, it sees the player being able to move left and right across a 2D plane, whilst taking advantage of a wide range of abilities. In the original Super Nintendo version's battle system, you could only perform certain attacks from a specific range. This version incorporates the improved system, first introduced to the world in Tales of Destiny, released only a few months prior to this remake. It allows you to freely move your character and attack with all of your skills at once, as well as giving commands to your teammates. Indeed, the battle system, as well as the graphics in towns, dungeons and battles, is taken straight out of the second installment of the franchise, and the battle arena, which was not featured in the first game, looks exactly like Destiny's. The biggest improvement, however, lies in the visuals. This is one of the earliest role-playing games where you can walk in 8 directions, even though towns and dungeons are still completely in 2D. For all of its flaws, this is still a decent game, but at this point it just isn't up to par with, say, Tales of the Abyss, Symphonia or Vesperia. Die-hard fans of the franchise and role-playing games alike should definitely give this one a go, as well as newcomers who may never have played a Tales game before, as it's a great way to experience the original and see how it all began. Pepsi Man isn't a great game by any stretch of the imagination, not in the way you'd think. In fact, one could replace him with Budman, that Taco Bell Chihuahua, or Ronald McDonald and get the same result. The gameplay is fun, addicting and very unique, and it sees you taking up the role of Pepsi Man, a superhero out to save thirsty people. You run non-stop through levels, dodging everything that gets in your way. This can involve cars, people, moving obstacles, gaps and whatever else may come your way. If you hit something, you will stop and lose time, and if you run out of time, the thirsty people will die and your mission is failed and you will have to try again. Once you make it to the end, you reach a Pepsi vending machine and you save the thirsty people. You can speed up or slow down temporarily, duck and jump, with each level taking about 3 to 5 minutes to complete. But not every level is the same in concept. At the end of a stage, we'll play a level where you have to run away from something. If the big object that chases gets to you and squashes you, you die and have to try again. Now, after completing levels, a guy drunk on Pepsi comes on the screen and talks some gibberish for a few seconds. It's funny the first few times you watch it, and it's quite refreshing to play a game that makes fun of itself every second you play. Visually, as you can tell, this game did not have a high budget. The graphics are average, and there are some impressive things, but for the most part it just doesn't hold up. The NPCs during gameplay are all two-dimensional and possess horrible animation. There are no FMVs or cinematic graphics, only the real-life footage of a crazy man that is addicted to Pepsi, as I mentioned earlier. Since you probably won't even see a store that sells or rents this game anymore, I suggest that if by some rare occasion you do see it, buy it. But if the price is higher than you think it's worth, don't bother. The words racing and RPG don't often go together, but that isn't the case when it comes to Square's Racing Lagoon. It sees you assuming the role of one Sho Akasaki as you set out to become a street racing legend. Now when it comes to gameplay, Racing Lagoon is made up of two types of play. Of course, you've got the standard RPG elements like interacting with NPCs, as well as the core of the experience, which is the racing itself. Throughout the game, you'll receive currency as well as something known as RP, which can both be used to acquire new parts for your car. From entire engines to individual cosmetic changes, there's a generous amount of options which allow the player to experiment and get used to a setup that suits them best. The best thing about it is that no matter how small the change, it's noticeable once out on the track. May it be handling, acceleration, or your overall speed, acquiring better items lends the game a real sense of progression that will likely keep you glued to your screen. Now the game is largely split up into levels, which are dovetailed by a boss or rival you must defeat in order to advance. Whilst driving around each level, it's possible to challenge other drivers by simply flicking on your headlights to enter a race. Upon defeating them, you then get to choose from several parts that make up your rival's car and keep them for yourself, providing you have enough RP to do so. Now visually, for a PS1 game, Racing Lagoon is held up pretty well. To be fair, it never reaches the same heights of Ridge Racer Type 4 or Gran Turismo 2, but it does succeed in presenting a believable racing experience with plenty of visual flair. Although Racing Lagoon never left Japan, recently a full translation was made available, which opens up the game to a far wider audience to enjoy. If you're a racing enthusiast and also have a love of deep and rewarding RPGs, Racing Lagoon will be right up your street. If you're at all familiar with the PlayStation, you've no doubt heard of the Jumping Flash series. These games were cute, colourful, amazingly fun, and very playable, who saw you taking on the role of a robot rabbit who saves the world. The series took a long hiatus, and it wasn't until 1999 that a new entry released in Japan. Due to poor sales, it never found its way to the West, and as a result has never seen a new entry in the franchise since. Now gameplay is largely split up into a series of missions. As you complete them, one of three things happen. More areas pop up on the game map with more missions to do. More pop up in the same places you may have already done missions in, or in very rare cases, nothing at all happens. The game itself plays much like any other Jumping Flash game. You get super jumping powers, a front-mounted gun for shooting at enemies, and a few fun-to-use firecrackers which are unlockable. The actual missions, despite being very short, are well done, quite fun, and have enough variety to keep you playing. There are a few missions where you go skydiving and try to fall through rings, a search and destroy mission with 13 ghosts in a spooky graveyard, and the linear get to the end sort of mission, among others. Like all Jumping Flash games, the replay value is very high. The levels are highly explorable and fun to hop around in, and you can go and hunt for cards if you get bored as well. These cards contain pictures of items from the supposed history of Jumping Flash, and makes for a nice distraction if you fancy doing something different to missions. Though flawed, Robert Monju is a delightful, fun, and perfectly playable platform game with interesting characters, good gameplay, and well-designed missions that is bound to keep players busy for quite some time. Well, that does it for the video. Keep an eye out for part 3, as that will be coming up soon. So don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified. You can follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date, and also join our growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to our Patreon supporters Rhino, Skill Jim, Nano, Steve, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Quinn, Dio, and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're at all interested in joining our Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of the links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.